Why does one clinic charge $7,000 while another charges $3,500 for what appears to be the same pair of hearing aids? If you've researched hearing aids for more than a few minutes, you've probably noticed that pricing seems all over the place. And honestly, that confusion is one of the biggest reasons people become suspicious of hearing aid pricing in the first place. Because once you start comparing options, you suddenly hear terms like service packages, included follow-up care, professional fees, programming visits, adjustment appointments, ongoing support, separate service charges, bundled versus unbundled. And at some point, most people start asking the same question: what exactly am I paying for? And unfortunately, many people make important financial decisions before they fully understand what's actually happening. Some people pay for years of support they rarely use. Other people choose the cheapest option available, only to discover later that they accidentally gave up the exact support they needed to succeed. And that's where hearing aid pricing becomes very tricky. Why hearing aid pricing feels so confusing. One of the biggest misconceptions in hearing health care is that people think they're only buying a device. In reality, hearing care often includes much more than the hearing aids themselves. It may involve hearing evaluations, device selection, programming, verification, follow-up adjustments, counseling, troubleshooting, maintenance, long-term support. Even before someone purchases hearing aids, professional expertise plays a major role. Determining whether hearing aids are appropriate, selecting the right technology, choosing the correct style, and setting realistic expectations can dramatically influence outcomes. I've seen people purchase excellent hearing aids that were completely wrong for their lifestyle, communication needs, or expectations. And when that happens, people often conclude hearing aids don't work, when the real problem started long before the devices were ever fitted. This is where pricing becomes confusing. Different clinics package these services in very different ways. Some combine everything into one large package. Others separate the devices from the professional services. And to patients, those approaches can appear dramatically different even when the hearing aids themselves look nearly identical. What bundled pricing means: with bundled pricing, the hearing aids and professional services are combined into one overall package price. That package may include the hearing aids, initial fitting, follow-up appointments, programming adjustments, cleanings, troubleshooting, warranty support, ongoing professional care. For many patients, the upfront number can feel surprisingly high, and I understand why. When someone sees a single large price, it's easy to assume most of the cost comes from the devices themselves, but hearing aid success rarely depends on the day the hearing aids are purchased. It depends on what happens afterward. I see this all the time. Someone receives hearing aids and initially feels excited. Then a few weeks later, they realize restaurants are still difficult. Their own voice sounds different. Certain sounds feel too sharp. Background noise feels overwhelming. Music doesn't sound quite right. That's normal. Hearing aid adaptation is a process. The brain has to adjust. Settings often require refinement. Listening strategies may need to change. Bundled pricing is built around the idea that many patients will require ongoing support during that process. Why some people dislike bundled pricing. At the same time, there are valid reasons some people dislike bundled care. Not every patient requires extensive follow-up support. Some individuals adapt quickly, some rarely need adjustments. Others are highly independent and comfortable managing technology on their own. For those patients, bundled pricing can sometimes feel like paying for services they may never fully use. This is one reason unbundled pricing became more popular. People began asking, what if I only pay for services when I actually need them? And from a consumer perspective, that's a reasonable question. The challenge is that many people don't know how much support they'll need until they begin wearing hearing aids in everyday life. That's where things become less predictable. What unbundled pricing means. With unbundled pricing, the hearing aids are separated from the professional services. Instead of one large package, patients pay individually for services such as testing, fittings, follow-up visits, programming adjustments, verification, cleanings, repairs, troubleshooting. At first glance, this often looks significantly less expensive. The upfront number is lower, and that lower number can be very appealing, especially for someone concerned about cost. But this is where assumptions can create problems. Many people think, I'll buy the hearing aids now and pay for help later if I need it. Sometimes that works perfectly. But sometimes the need for support appears almost immediately. I've seen patients purchase hearing aids elsewhere and later become frustrated because speech still isn't clear. Settings feel uncomfortable, noise, communication remains difficult. Then they discover they must pay separately for the adjustments and support they didn't anticipate needing. That's often when people start feeling as though they're paying twice. First for the hearing aids, then for the help required to make them work successfully. The question most people should ask. I think many people focus on the wrong question. The question often becomes, which option is cheaper? But the better question is, what level of support am I realistically going to need? Because hearing aid success isn't determined solely by the technology. It's also influenced by adaptation, lifestyle demands, communication needs, listening environments, comfort, motivation, brain processing, expectations. Some people thrive with very little support. Others need multiple follow-up visits, extensive counseling, ongoing adjustments, and regular troubleshooting. Neither group is wrong. People simply have different needs, and that's why hearing aid pricing can vary so dramatically. Why pricing often feels unfair. Another reason hearing aid pricing creates frustration is that people can easily see the devices, but they can't easily see the professional care. They can see a hearing aid. They can't see clinical expertise, programming precision, verification measures, counseling quality, long-term support. As a result, many people assume the physical device accounts for most of the cost. That's understandable. Hearing aids are small. People naturally wonder, how can something this tiny cost so much? But one thing I've learned over the years is that advanced technology alone rarely guarantees success. I've seen expensive hearing aids perform poorly because they were never properly fit or adjusted. And I've seen more modest technology perform remarkably well because the fitting process and support were handled appropriately. That's an important distinction. Because hearing aid outcomes are often influenced as much by the care process as the hardware itself. Who may benefit from each approach? Neither pricing model is automatically better. It depends on the individual. People who are experienced hearing aid users, comfortable with technology, and highly independent may do very well with unbundled care. They may prefer paying only for the services they actually use. On the other hand, bundled care may be extremely valuable for first-time hearing aid users, people concerned about adaptation, individuals with complex listening difficulties, those who prefer ongoing guidance and support. Many patients don't know which category they fall into until after they begin treatment. That's why these decisions can feel challenging, because hearing aids aren't simply a product purchase. For many people, they're the beginning of a rehabilitation process involving both the ears and the brain. Some clinics also use a middle ground approach. They include the services most patients need during the initial adjustment period, while separating certain long-term maintenance services later. For some patients, that balance works extremely well. The biggest mistake people make. One of the biggest mistakes I see is assuming the lowest upfront price automatically represents the best value. Price and value are not always the same thing. Sometimes paying more upfront provides support that significantly improves outcomes. Other times, a person may genuinely need very little ongoing care. The key is understanding exactly what is included and whether that matches your needs. Because many frustrating hearing aid experiences aren't caused by the hearing aids themselves. They're caused by poor expectations, inadequate support, lack of counseling, insufficient follow-up, or choosing a care model that wasn't a good fit. Those are very different problems. So, is bundled or unbundled hearing aid pricing better? Honestly, it depends far more on the person than most people realize. Most people truly benefit from some form of ongoing bundled support, but the most important thing is that you understand what you're actually paying for, not just the devices, but also the support, the rehabilitation, the adjustments, the expertise, and the long-term process of adapting to better hearing. because sometimes what looks expensive up front is actually preventing years of frustration. And sometimes what looks cheaper initially quietly becomes much more costly emotionally, socially, and financially over time. That's why I always encourage people, don't just ask, how much do these hearing aids cost? Also ask yourself, what kind of support am I realistically going to need going forward to succeed?